I had a friend ask me not too long ago, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I feel at peace." He said, "How do you get there?" And it's just like, how do you get to peace? Well, my immediate response is, when the mind is calmed, it becomes a natural state of being. So how do we calm the mind? And sometimes there is an investigation of looking at what is just the opposite of peace so that we can go from there and build into a state of consciousness around peace. And so there is something that I wanted to address today that initially is not about peace, but that it leads to a state of peace. 104 or 103 years ago today, Christmas Eve, on the battlefield of Belgium, German troops were approaching, making their way across Europe. And there was an Allied response against that incursion into Europe. And it resulted in Allied forces representing Canada, France, England, Belgium, Scotland, in that particular time in 1914, against the German troops. And in World War I, what was called the Great War to End All Wars, later called World War I, the battle lines sometimes were just 180 feet across in no man's land, as they called it at that time. And there was this process when on Christmas Eve 103 years ago there was a silence because everyone on both sides agreed to have a ceasefire. And those on the Allied side could hear the voices of the German troops just 180 feet away. And they got it that the German soldiers were not subhuman people that the propaganda machine had told them that they were, but they were human beings. And they could hear them just a small distance away, singing Christmas songs. And that they viewed them having along the trenches, because it was trench warfare, as all of you know, at that time. They saw little 2-foot-tall Christmas trees with little candles on them bobbing up and down as the soldiers on the German trenches delivering symbols of hope to the German soldiers. And with those images and with that singing, an Allied soldier started to sing. And then many more started to sing. And both sides heard each other. And at one miraculous moment, one soldier on the Allied side stood up. It was a very dangerous moment of hesitancy. But then a German soldier stood up with a Christmas tree lit with candles, and they both started to walk towards each other across no man's land. And in that moment, no man's land turned to every man's land. And there was more and more troops standing and walking together towards each other, greeting each other, and speaking, because some of the German troops had lived in London prior to the war. And there was a greeting and sharing of pictures and food and memories. That was on Christmas Eve. This is a true story called the Christmas Truce. There's actual reenactment footage, actually, of this event that happened this very day, 103 years ago. The next day, Christmas Day, continued a ceasefire, and those troops continued to interact. And they came out and they played a football game. And they spent the day together. And their superiors were worried because they weren't going to go back into battle with each other. In fact, in truth, it is said in my research that a lot of those troops needed to be moved to other areas because they refused to fight each other again. So, it's a very powerful story for me, because all my life I have worked towards bringing inner peace into my own consciousness, and I have labored and been with people as they were in a place of inner struggle and inner battle with themselves to have peace. And in our center in Cottonwood, Arizona, I was sharing this information on one holiday evening event, and the owner of that facility where we held our services, William Eaton, said, what would a Christ figure or Jesus say at this time in human history if he came back and viewed the circumstances of the day now? Well, there was a lot of conversation about what he or she would say if they came back a totally enlightened being. But, I was thinking about this, and you and we all have this Christ figure within ourselves. What is our response to the conditions of the day? A partner friend of mine some years ago went to a Christmas gathering at night, and it was a Christmas concert. And there was a very large crucifix with Jesus, a depiction of Jesus hanging on the cross. And my mother asked my companion at the time, what do you think Jesus was thinking in that time, hanging up on the cross? And my companion friend, who was Jewish, looked at her without hesitancy and said, Oy vey, oy vey. And so when we think about our response to the conditions and circumstances of the world, we may silently say, oy vey, oy vey. But I have to say that in some of the deeper teachings that I have come across over the years, and in fact there was this book by a woman named Alice Bailey who had a very deep teaching. And she wrote a book called The Reappearance of the Christ. And the basic premise of that book was, well, perhaps the Christ may return again in human form. But the challenge of the day is not to have that outer expectancy, but to have an expectancy of an inner Christ reappearing through each one of us. In fact, that is the whole gist or the whole meaning behind the day. And Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, said that the molecules of Jesus the Christ, upon the resurrection that is held in the Unity tradition, that the molecules of his consciousness are spread throughout the mental atmosphere of the planet, and that they are accessible at any given moment from anyone who cares to call upon him. And I've shared this one story some months ago, that I was driving to a concert in Kansas called Wakefield Concert, and I was going through a great deal at the time. I was newly engaged to my wife, and she was asleep next to me in the car, and we were driving along, and I was just going through a whole lot. And I just started to say to myself and audibly, Jesus, 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 help, help, help me. I have used every tool in my tool bag spiritually. I don't know what else to do. Because I was torn between the life that I had lived and a new life that I was adjusting to, a whole new way of being. And it was a difficult adjustment. And I kept saying this name. And within a space of 10 minutes' time, I had a feeling of tremendous peace come over me. Tremendous peace. And everybody in this room has a different relationship with this idea, the historical Jesus, or Jesus the Christ, or Christ Jesus. We may have dispensed with it altogether. But there's something powerful in consciousness that is there. And it draws the veil back from that which is perceived as absolute separation into a joining with a level of existence that we all desire deeply in our hearts for that inner peace. And I want to tell you a story about someone who had a near-death experience. It was my uncle, Uncle Milton. And I remember being just about 5 or 6 years old, sitting on his lap and looking at his forehead. His forehead had this big embedded piece of glass underneath the skin. And I pointed to it and I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, that's when I got in an automobile accident years and years ago. And I had an experience, and I was too young at that time to grasp what he was talking about, but it was later shared with me that his near-death experience, what happened was that he went to a place that he called the music of the spheres. And that there was this music of the divine that was so beautiful. He said, "I have never, ever experienced anything like it before or since." And there was also a great peace there. A great peace that he carried with him his whole life upon his return into the body. He didn't want to come back, which is a common report for people that have these experiences. But he wasn't done yet. But the quality of peace is a natural state for each one of us if our thinking mind can be calmed. It's not something that's so rare. It's actually there all the time if we can be still. And the awakened consciousness of, say, a Jesus or a Buddha or one of these great way-showers of how to enter into a way of being. They show us a path to peace. And when we consider the courage and the strength that it took for these people in these trenches to get up and have the faith and to have the drive of desiring peace, even at the expense of potentially being shot and killed in that moment. That's pretty powerful. So, the invitation in terms of making this personal for you is that what is it that we can lay down and let go of to access our own sense of inner peace? I would like to show a clip, an example of this Christmas truce. It's only about 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And I invite you to look at and feel into the power of its potential for peace. Go ahead.
Jenkins, Oakley, Knight.
Ein Britter kommt! Ein Britter kommt!
Jim?
Jim, don't do it!
Halt! Er ist nicht bewaffnet! Nein, Otto!
My name is Jim.
Mein Name ist Otto.
Pleased to meet you, Otto.
Freut mich.
Rose, she's called.
Schön. Schön. Danke. Happy Christmas. Frohe Weihnachten.
Pretty cool, huh? That's what's available. That's what our potential is within us. The reappearance of the Christ shines through each one of us. That's what the Christmas message is really all about. It's not waiting for the return of a figure of Jesus or anyone else. It's about allowing it to move through us. That's the reappearance of the Christ. And I invite you to take just a moment. Take a risk. These men did. Take a moment. Take a risk. And greet the people that are around you in the goodwill of Christmas Eve. Take a moment. Say hello. We already stood, but this can be something extra special. Just turn to each other and really wish Merry Christmas. So guess what? Guess what? That was the reappearance of the Christ. Right then. Right then. And so was this film. That was the reappearance of the Christ. It can happen any second. This beautiful sharing from the heart, when we calm the mind and we allow ourselves to extend and to embrace each other in the goodwill that is there. Peace on earth, goodwill to all. Thank you.